Perfect. Okay, so behind me you'll see two different soil profiles, one being obviously more visually attractive than the other. If this was my maize field, I would want this one, not that one. Currently, 2/3 of the topsoil that is covering the surface of our earth is desertifying. This means that this healthy soil that is naturally capable of holding water and holding nutrients is turning into this, a desert-like soil that is not capable of either of these two capacities. You may be observing this trend on your farm currently. Maybe in the last 5 years you've thought, oh, I'm putting down more inputs, I'm irrigating more frequently. Today, we are going to be talking about one of the many solutions to solve this problem. And this is a solution that is currently being used on Oscar's farm successfully. And this is applying biochar as a soil amendment. But what is biochar? Biochar has actually been existed since 8000 BC by ancient Amazonians that applied terra preta, what we call today biochar, to amend their soils which had no nutrient and no water retaining capacity. Biochar is actually a very big term. There are many different biochars that have very different characteristics depending on how they're made. And this impacts their implicated use. But today, we are talking about the biochar that is used on Oscar's and on Francisco's farm as a soil amendment. So, very simply put, it is a carbonized organic material that has sponge-like capacities, and this is due to its very porous and channel-like structure. It also is a very, very high form of carbon, and these two characteristics are due to how it's made. When you are carrying out pyrolysis, you take a biomass. This can be vegetative waste from your farm, so you actually are valorizing waste, and you submit this biomass, this feedstock, to very high temperatures, generally between 350 degrees to 800 degrees Celsius, in anaerobic conditions. And this forms 3 byproducts, being bio-oil, syngas, and a very high carbon, stable form, solid form, which is biochar. Meaning, when you put biochar into the soil, it acts as a stable reservoir of carbon separate from the atmosphere, which is why it's being used currently as a climate mitigation strategy. But today, we are talking about its use as a soil amendment. I'm going to explain some methods of how you can implement the creation of biochar on your farm. For agricultural uses, it's advised to produce biochar at a lower temperature of 450 degrees Celsius. This is because at this lower temperature, there is not a complete decomposition and there are still functional groups on the surface of the biochar, and this is essential to capture nutrients, which we want in agricultural uses. To carry out this is an example of 4 methods. There's actually a talk also on biochar tomorrow where another method will be explained, so that will be very interesting to go to too. The first one is open burn. This is a photo taken from this farm. The Contiki kiln, the retort kiln, and the rotatable covered cavity kiln. If you're looking for a more medium-scale method, this is the Waste X. It's more engineered. And as for a large scale, this is the Pyreg PX. It's a German company, and this is for climate mitigation uses. For climate mitigation, a higher temperature of 700 to 800 degrees is suitable. This is the temperature in which graphitization occurs. Graphitization is when smaller pores combine to create bigger pores. This is more recalcitrant, more stable, but you will not observe the same nutrient absorbing in this soil. One final thing, before we move on, there are gases that are emitted during pyrolysis. However, The carbon sequestration benefits that you will observe and that will occur when you put your biochar into the soil outweighs these emissions, resulting in a net positive impact on climate mitigation change. Now, what is the difference between biochar and ash? They are very similar and they are used for very similar uses as a soil amendment to stabilize your pH. However, first difference, the difference in these two materials is due to how they're made. So, biochar on this side of the screen is created through pyrolysis, as previously mentioned. This is a thermal decomposition with no oxygen. Ash is a combustion, so a burning in the presence of oxygen. This firstly impacts the carbon content. In fact, with biochar, due to the fact that there is no oxidation, 50 and in some cases 90% of the overall weight of biochar is carbon. Ash, on the other hand, due to the fact that it's burnt in the presence of oxygen, the carbon in your biomass, for example wood, is oxidized and carried off in the form of CO2 into the atmosphere. Second difference is in the stability. Again, this is due to how it's made. Biochar is majoritively composed of polyaromatic carbon compounds. This is what gives it a honeycomb-like structure. This honeycomb structure makes it very, very resistant to microbial decomposition and erosion from strong winds and rains. This means that when you put biochar into your soil, you will be reaping the benefits for the next decade minimum. You do not need to reapply it. Ash, on the other hand, you apply it, there is a strong wind or a strong rain, you have to reapply, similar to other synthetic inputs. Third difference is in the porosity. We can actually see from these two pictures, these two microbial photos, that there is a big difference between the two pores. Biochar, on this side, is very uniform pores compared to ash. Why is this? Again, due to pyrolysis and combustion. After combustion, there is only inorganic or mostly inorganic material that's left behind, notably silicates, for example. These inorganic materials promote a crystalline and compact structure. From pyrolysis, as we said, there's lots of carbon, there's lots of organic material left behind. This is what promotes a porous structure. And finally, the last difference is in the pH. After combustion, there are lots of oxides, and oxides are very, very alkaline, giving ash its alkalinity. There was one study, and they took the same piece of wood, and it was burnt with combustion. The pH of this ash was 12.8. This same piece of wood was pyrolyzed. The biochar was 8.2, a pH of 8.2. Ash and biochar are used for very similar purposes, but when you apply biochar, it is a long-term and sustainable fix. This is not the same as ash, that when you apply it, you will have to put it down in the next season or before that. Okay, so would your soil benefit from biochar? Here behind me are 3 soil profiles, sand, loam, and clay, and their average specific surface area. The biochar of coffee crop residues pyrolyzed at 500 degrees Celsius created a biochar with a specific surface area of 40.1 meters squared. Again, this is very average, and again, we are only talking about the biochar produced on Oscar and Francisco's farms. But what is the specific surface area? To put this into perspective, if you took 1 gram of biochar, this biochar, and spread it out into a perfectly thin layer, as far as you can go, it would cover 40.1 times by 41.1 meters. This is roughly 10 to 11 parking spaces in a parking lot. So it's really big, and this is what allows us to understand the multitude of microscopic pores and channels that run through biochar. As when we calculate the specific surface area, it is us measuring each pore and each channel. So it really, really is like a sponge. So When we look at sand, we can see that it has a much lower specific surface area in comparison. And this makes complete sense, as we know sand has the lowest ability to hold and retain water and nutrients. It has no sponge-like capacity, meaning when you add biochar into your sandy soil, if you have a very sandy soil, you will observe increased ability of your soil to retain and hold water and nutrients. Now, if we look at clay on the other side of the arrow, it has a very, very high specific surface area. Although this is great, too much of a clay soil, as you all know, can become detrimental to your crop. It can cause nutrient lockup and waterlogging. And as we all know, coffee crops do not like having overly wet roots. This is where biochar is very multi-purpose, as when you add the biochar into the soil, it acts like a sponge equally, absorbing the excess water and promoting aeration, airflow, water flow, nutrient flow. So, if we look at loam, even though this has maybe an optimal specific surface area, this does not mean that biochar will not benefit your loamy soil. It will also promote nutrient availability and microbial diversity. So, what is the actual role of biochar? What role will it play on your farm? Biochar intervenes in the chemistry, structure, pH, and biodiversity of your soil. In turn, this will impact your need for inputs, your need for labor to apply these inputs, your need for power to irrigate your farm, and it will also decrease the carbon footprint of your soil, of your farm, sorry. These are all great. I would want to have these on my farm. How? Biochar is not magic. This is all done and appears because of the specific surface area that I previously described. It firstly increases the moisture absorption capacity of your soil. In fact, again, if we take out 1 gram of biochar and we pour water on it, it will absorb 1.5 grams of water, so its own weight and more. This is a great solution for farmers that are wanting to decrease the use of irrigation on their farms. But again, not to forget, if your farm is too much water, it will also de-waterlog your soil. The next impact is on the cation exchange capacity, and this is really, really essential. But firstly, what is the cation exchange capacity? Cations are positively charged ions. And if we think about all the nutrients that all plants need to thrive and survive, nitrogen, NO3+, calcium, Ca2+, magnesium, Mg2+, potassium, K+, lots of pluses, these are all cations. Meaning, biochar, due to how it's produced, has majoritively negatively charged sites on its surface. And if you think about a magnet, opposites attract. Meaning when you put the biochar into the soil, it will attract the cations from the surrounding soil solution. If your soil has a high CEC, it means the soil particles are very good at attracting and retaining and keeping cations in its surface of the particle. It will keep them until your plant is ready to absorb them. Similarly, on the other side, if your soil has a low CEC, the particles are really not good at attracting and keeping these needed nutrients in the soil. If you are solving this problem by adding inputs, synthetic inputs into your soil, this will also do no good, as these synthetic nutrients have nothing to keep them close to the rhizosphere of your plant and will just cause pollution elsewhere where there is a significant CEC. So, when biochar is added into your soil, you can either 1, improve the natural capacity of your soil to hold and retain nutrients, or 2, increase the efficiency of the synthetic fertilizer that you are applying. Third main role of biochar is its carbon mitigation. This will be developed by Francisco later on, but a fun fact, 1 ton of biochar added into the soil will remove 3 to 6 tons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. This will have a great change on climate mitigation strategies. So there's more carbon in your soil. This is great for the environment. This is great for the carbon footprint of your farm. But what does this do to the soil? Luckily, it has a positive impact on, firstly, the soil structure, as carbon promotes the formation of large aggregates in the soil, which we want for movement of air, water, and nutrients. It also impacts the pH of the soil. And again, we are only talking about the type of biochar used on Oscar and Francisco's farm. And here we found that the biochar has a pH of 6 to 9, so fairly neutral. And this can reduce the propagation and the spread of pH-induced diseases such as fusarium. One of the final impact and role that biochar will play on your farm and on your soil is the soil biodiversity. Again, if we think about the porous structure, that photo that was here, all these little pores can act as a habitat for the soil microorganisms. And the more soil microorganisms, the healthier your soil and in turn your plant will be. The final thing before you ever add a biochar into your soil is you must activate it. Without biochar activation, you will not observe these same benefits as I previously discussed. So, why is this? If you think about a sponge, a dry sponge, and a bowl that has a little bit of soapy water at the bottom, you plop this dry sponge in and it will absorb all the water that it can from the bowl, leaving the bowl dry. This is exactly the same principle as adding unactivated biochar into a soil. The unactivated biochar, all of the anion and cation exchange sites are empty, meaning when it goes into the soil, the first thing it will do is absorb all the nutrients, all the water that it can from the soil, leaving none for your plant. So at first, you will observe a very unhappy plant. What you must do is activate it. And here, this is where you as farmers have a great advantage, as you can customize and tailor your biochar depending on what your soil is lacking and what your crops are needing. So imagine you just had a soil analysis and you saw that your soil's lacking nitrogen and potassium. You will go and buy nitrogen and potassium, strong fertilizer, apply it, but then, oh no, there's a strong rain and it's all leached away and there's none left for your plants. If you had activated biochar with this specific fertilizer and added it, you would not have had this problem, as it is retained and kept in the soil for your plants. But activating it with synthetic fertilizer is not the only option. I really advise you to go on a tour of Oscar's farm, and there you will see where he activates his biochar with compost, which is this first one, Combi. And actually, adding compost in while adding biochar into your composting recipe will decrease the time of composting, as there is increased microbes, increased air, increased moisture. Another method is rapid liquid inoculation. This is a quick charging of the biochar with worm castings, compost tea, for example. Another method is animal activation or microorganism activation. I'll now pass you on to Oscar, that was all the science behind it, but he will tell you if it actually really works, and it will be in Spanish, so change around your translators. Thank you.
Bueno, muy buenas tardes para todos. Un placer tenerlos por acá. Un trabajo que se hizo después de que tomamos la decisión de hacer este maravilloso evento acá. Un grupo de trabajadores trabajando las 24 horas. Teníamos proyectado hacer las reformas, pero tuvimos que adelantar lo que íbamos a hacer en 2 años, en 6 meses. Entonces, ojalá disfruten el espacio, vean qué hay detrás, pues para aquellos tostadores que quieren transmitirle a sus clientes qué hay detrás de una taza de café. Bueno, soy mi doctor. Bueno, soy la tercera generación. Me he dedicado a este negocio desde hace ya varios años, y la cual pues he venido aprendiendo desde mi abuelo y de mi señor padre, que está acá con nosotros. Bueno, nosotros encontramos, ¿dónde puedo ubicar? ¿Allá? ¿Dónde? No, atrás es la primera, para enfocar Nosotros encontramos los suelos de esta manera. Eran unos suelos totalmente estériles. Entonces, por innovación de mi abuelo y de mi padre, decidimos sembrar árboles maderables, la cual el eucalipto es una variedad que perfora el suelo, y de esa manera se soltaron los suelos. Eran suelos que prácticamente para la fabricación de ladrillo, de teja, pero para agricultura no funcionaban. Entonces, ya después que empezamos con el aprovechamiento forestal, empezamos a mirar qué hacíamos con esa madera, qué comercialización y qué más podíamos sacar. Entonces decidimos, por temas económicos, sacar carbón. Entonces era más complicado la comercialización y el pago era muy maluco, pues no generaba mucho ingreso. Entonces decidimos con mi padre empezar a sacar el carbón y agregárselo a los cultivos. Entonces empezamos a hacer mezclas y empezamos a ver que las plantas se exportaban mejor en las épocas de verano y empezaban a producir más. Entonces de esa manera lo empezamos a hacer más continuamente y de una manera pues tradicional. Hoy en día pues ya estamos trabajando un poco más, pero como tal llevamos trabajando desde el año 2000 en adelante. O sea, en este momento llevamos 25 años de experiencia de venir trabajando con el carbón. Los que tuvieron la experiencia de dar el paseo por el recorrido que se marcó, pueden ver el cambio con esta fotografía, el cambio de lo que ha tenido el terreno. Entonces, el sistema del biochar nos ha ayudado a mejorar los suelos, a entregar un producto muy puro, muy sano, y también a bajar un poco los costos. Nosotros lo hacemos de manera tradicional, pero también le agregamos lo que son las mieles, las aguas mieles, las aguas de lixiviados del café, van allá a donde se van haciendo las mezclas con el biochar, y luego enriquecemos los compostes. Entonces, cada vez que recibimos una fincas que la hemos tomado en alquiler o hemos comprado, hemos recibido producciones de fincas de 1.5 kilos de café cereza, y en estos momentos ya los llevamos a 3 y 4 kilos. ¿Por qué? Porque este sistema le da humedad, le da retención de agua. Entonces los veranos, así hayan veranos, la manta va a permanecer con buena humedad. De esa manera pues hemos venido creciendo, hemos venido aumentando la producción, y de esa manera pues le hemos entregado a los productores, a los tostadores, un producto cada vez más puro, más sano y más sostenible.
Bueno, como lo contaba acá Óscar, gracias a estas prácticas orgánicas regenerativas, pues hemos venido creciendo en áreas. Esto ha permitido pues gran generación de empleo. Tenemos pues muchas mujeres trabajando en nuestras fincas, asociadas y propias. Nos ha permitido también, pues en este momento, contar ya con 7 certificaciones, las cuales certifican todos los procesos pues que realizamos en nuestras fincas. Nos ha permitido pues crecer, cambiar de una finca a una gran empresa y pues tener presencia en estos momentos en muchos mercados internacionales.
Bueno, esta es una estructura de un biochar tomado de la finca de Oscar y como se puede ver se parece mucho al que nos mostró Amellia al principio, es decir que el proceso de Oscar funciona y Oscar lo está haciendo muy bien con el proceso que está haciendo en la finca. Yo también tengo una finca de café, un café orgánico certificado y comencé este año a hacer unos experimentos. Son 11 tipos de experimentos, tenemos un grupo de control, tenemos un grupo que fertilizamos con compost de porquinaza y tenemos 9 experimentos en que mezclamos biochar en diferente proporción y activado con diferentes productos. Tenemos un biochar activado con lombricompost, un biochar activado con estiércol de cabra y miel de café y un biochar activado con porquinaza y finalmente un biochar activado con microorganismos, fijadores de nitrógeno y solubilizadores de fósforo. Hasta este momento no hemos tenido cosecha, pero ya hemos podido ver avances de los grupos que tienen biochar en crecimiento vegetativo y en desarrollo de la planta. Entonces digamos que el tema es muy prometedor para nuestra finca también en el tema de producción y luego miraremos el tema de taza, cómo funciona. Entonces, digamos que, ya un momento. Es una herramienta que yo recomiendo meterla dentro de nuestra caja de herramientas de resiliencia para el tema de cambio climático y riesgo. Yo lo metería en la misma caja que pondría un biodigestor, reservorios de agua, cultivos de cobertura, árboles de sombrío y diversificar el ingreso. Digamos que todos estamos expuestos a riesgo político, a riesgo de mercado y a riesgo climático y pues digamos que es una alternativa que nos permite reducir ese riesgo que tenemos ante esa variación. Ya vimos anteriormente que nos aumenta la productividad, que digamos que podemos recuperar lotes que antes habían sido dañados, de pronto contaminados con metales pesados, podemos empezar a descontaminarlos, lotes que habíamos descartado de pronto en lugares de la finca porque no tenían las condiciones para poner café, con este tipo de tecnologías podemos empezar a usar esos lugares y aumentar la viabilidad de la finca. Digamos que un tema importante para todo esto es el ciclo de vida del producto. Podemos analizar, digamos que el ciclo de vida del café en las fincas y mirar si tenemos una finca que es carbono positiva o carbono negativa o carbono neutra. Este tipo de fincas, como la que vemos acá de Óscar o como la mía, somos fincas que capturamos carbono, es decir, que después de analizar los combustibles fósiles quemados, después de analizar los residuos de cosecha, la fertilización y todos los procesos de la finca, nos damos cuenta que estamos capturando carbono. Y este tipo de fincas tenemos la posibilidad de ir a la cadena de valor, ir hacia los tostadores y compensar la emisión de gases de efecto invernadero que ellos tienen y poderle generar mayor valor a la cadena de producción, inclusive mostrar a los productores que tomar una lección de café de estas fincas está ayudando con el tema ambiental, está ayudando a capturar carbono. Eso lo podemos hacer en una cosa que se llama insetting, que es dentro de la misma cadena de valor compensamos las emisiones de carbono, pero también lo podemos hacer a través del mercado, a través del offsetting. Y es que cuando podemos ir dentro de otra cadena de producción, podemos ir a otra industria y podemos venderle esos certificados de reducción de emisiones. Para eso tenemos que asociarnos, tenemos que ser un poquito más grandes para poder cubrir los costos que tiene esos registros y todos esos estándares para poder tener un certificado de reducción de emisiones, que es una tonelada de CO2, y poder ir al mercado, a un marketplace y poder ir a venderlo. Entonces digamos que son alternativas que nos pueden ayudar también a tener mayores ingresos. Directos pueden ser un sobreprecio al café o indirectos podemos empezar a vender servicios ambientales. Los servicios ambientales, por ejemplo, en este momento en Colombia tienen una reducción de impuestos y puede ser una alternativa de ingreso para las fincas. Entonces, resumiendo, nos ayuda a la resiliencia al cambio climático, nos ayuda a tener mayores ingresos y nos ayuda a mejorar la calidad del café y el producto final. Les agradecemos mucho por su atención y pues vamos a poner un código QR donde pueden descargar la investigación que hizo Amellia en inglés y en español. Muchísimas gracias.